If you are growing trees, especially fruit trees, the most important thing you must do for their health and productivity is to prune them annually. Yet, so many people are afraid to prune their trees because they think it hurts them and they can't bring themselves to cut into the wood. This is an enormous mistake, and on today's video, I'm going to show you all exactly why you must prune your trees, especially your fruit trees, every single year, because it is not only killing your harvest not to do so, but it's hurting the trees themselves.
If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and check out my Amazon store and Spreadshop links in the video description for everything I use in my garden and awesome custom apparel and gear.
The number one reason why you must prune your trees annually is that pruning the trees stimulates the growth of new wood for the season. The vast majority of trees out there produce their flowers and the fruits on the new season's growth. So if you fail to prune your fruit trees, you are going to get a minimal amount of new budwood that is going to produce flowers and fruit for the season. If you cut your trees back, it's going to stimulate that growth hormone, and you're going to get a huge flush of new budwood for the season, dramatically increasing your harvests. And by the way, this also holds true for flowering ornamentals as well. For example, take these fig trees behind me. Fig trees produce their main crop figs on the new season's growth. The new wood that will emerge in April, May, and June will start setting little figlets in late June and July, and they will ripen for me in the fall. So if I don't prune these trees, all of this old wood that you see right here, it won't produce any main crop figs for me. The main crop figs will come from the continuation of growth at these growth tips and also from any branches that may shoot out from the side. But this old wood that you see is basically worthless for me from a fruiting perspective. Now you may be asking, well, won't the trees just continue to grow and just produce more figs? Yes, but you have to keep in mind that the production is limited to the root capacity of the tree. Let me explain. The amount of new vertical growth that a tree can put on is going to be proportional to the amount of new roots that that tree grew. Just like you can't add several stories on top of a house without building out the foundation, you can't have a tree grow up without putting down new roots first. The tree's vertical growth is limited to that amount of root growth that it had. So because of that, if you don't cut your trees back, that new growth for the new year is going to be limited to whatever new roots the tree put down, which is going to be fairly minimal. The fig tree behind me is about 10 to 11 feet tall, and the reason why it arrived at that height is because at the end of the year, that was as much vertical growth as the root system of this tree could support. So if I fail to prune this tree, next year my new growth is going to be limited to whatever new roots this tree put down in late fall, winter, and into the spring, which is probably only going to be 2 or 3 feet. So that means that my main crop figs, if I do not prune this tree, are going to be limited to about 2 to 3 feet of new growth, and to harvest them I'm going to have to pull this whole tree down just to pick them, which is not only annoying, but it can be a little bit dangerous for a minimal harvest. Here is why pruning your fruit trees annually is so important. The root system as it stands is already developed enough to support a tree that is 10 to 11 feet tall, and we estimate by the end of next year it will probably be able to support a tree that is somewhere in the 12 to 15 foot tall range. Well, if I cut off all of this wood back to the cordons, which are at 1.5 feet and 3 feet high, that means this root system can now support something like 10 feet of new growth. And believe me, this fig tree will grow all 10 feet in one single season. So if I cut this fig tree back to these cordons, what actually will happen is I will get about 10 feet of new growth next year. That is 10 feet of fruiting wood that will make main crop figs instead of 2 to 3 feet. So by aggressively pruning these fig trees behind me, I will be able to increase my harvests 3 to 5-fold next year. Now, you may be thinking, this sounds highly theoretical and too good to be true. Is this actually going to happen in real life? Oh, believe me, this is true, and there's a reason why every single fruit farmer out there prunes their orchard pretty much every single year to make that new growth for the new fruit wood. And I actually ran this experiment last year. I, for the first time ever, did not prune these 6 fig trees, and it was a total disaster. My Smith fig tree right here actually did really well, probably because it's a very early variety. But My other 5 fig trees, it set them back so much that I didn't get harvests off of them. Because there was a minimal amount of budwood, my fig trees set the smallest crops they ever have, except for that Smith fig tree right there. And because they formed so much later, because I didn't prune them to stimulate the new growth, they ripened so late into the fall that I didn't get to harvest them. It was before the good weather where they would actually ripen properly. So I only got a good harvest off of this one tree, and the other 5 were a total loss. That's because I didn't prune them, and I will never do that again. So how much should you prune your fruit trees annually? Well, the rule of thumb generally is to remove about 25 to 33% of the volume of the tree. That's a quarter to a third of the volume of the tree. Figs are a little bit of an exception. You should prune them more like 50 to 60%, maybe even a little bit more because they grow so vigorously. But aside from figs, you usually want to go to that quarter to a third range. For example, I cut my persimmon back to here every single year. A persimmon tree is one that forms the fruits on the new season's growth. So this is where I will cut it back. I'll remove any of the dead wood on the tree. I'll remove any wood that is growing into the center of the tree because we want to keep the inner canopy of the tree able to get sunlight that helps increase the flowering and the fruiting. I will make sure to link to a video above and down in the video description that will show you exactly how to comprehensively prune a fruit tree. Reason number 2 why you must prune your trees annually is it is not in a tree's nature to flower and produce fruits profusely in their native habitat. People tell me all the time, trees don't get pruned in nature. Why should I prune mine? Well, that is because it is not the natural goal of any kind of flowering or fruiting tree to produce bumper crops for human consumption. Most trees in nature are simply just trying to survive, and they produce a bare minimum of seed just to fulfill the reproductive requirements of that species. So if you leave your tree unpruned and growing in such a way that it would naturally in a forest, expect it to perform very poorly and not fruit for you very heavily. Let me explain why. Think of all the times in your life you have gone hiking or walked through a forest or through hiking trails. When have you ever seen in nature a tree in a forest understory that is flowering profusely or overwhelmed with fruit where there's just fruit hanging all over the place? Wild trees flower and fruit very poorly, and there is a reason why. In a forest, your trees have to compete with hundreds of other trees where the roots are constantly trying to fight for their own space. And they're in understories where they're trying really hard to search out that sunlight in order to gather energy. So the trees that are growing in forests, they get minimal amounts of energy because of the whole dappled light situation that they're in. And then with that energy, they have to fight for root space and compete for that space, or else they will succumb and die and wither away. So because of that, when it comes time to flower and produce fruit, they don't have a lot of energy left to do so. For example, here where I live on the southeastern coast of North Carolina, we have native magnolia trees that are growing all over our forests. Anytime you go through a hike on the coastal plain here, you'll come across hundreds, if not thousands, of magnolia trees. And when you walk through the woods, you almost never see them flowering. The most you'll ever see, maybe you'll see, even on big magnolia trees, they'll have a dozen flowers or so, not very much at all. Yet if you go to one of these old southern colonial homes that has a 60, 70 foot tall monster magnolia tree in their front yard, that thing will be blooming profusely with hundreds, if not thousands of flowers. At the same time, the trees in the woods may only have a dozen flowers on them. And the reason why that happens is that magnolia tree that's planted in the front of the house, it's in full sun and its roots aren't competing with anything. So they get all the sun energy they want, the roots can grow as big as they want and they never have to compete, and they have all of that residual energy left over to flower like crazy. That's what we're actually trying to emulate when we plant fruit trees in our yard. We're trying to give them enough space to where they're not competing with a whole bunch of stuff. They're not competing with each other. They get their own dedicated root zone, and then they get as close to full sun as possible in most cases. So they're getting maximum solar energy, they're getting minimal competition for the roots, and because of that, they perform very well, provided you cut them back appropriately. They can put on that new budwood and flower for you. So when you do all of these things, you plant a tree in a location that it gets full sun, you give it enough of an open area that the roots don't have to compete with any other trees, and you tip prune it every single year to spur new growth, you get insane harvests like you see on this Owari Satsuma tree right here. This is not normal. This is not something that would occur in nature. This is because of cultivation practices. I have set this tree up with everything it needs to succeed. So it is expressing the genes for insane fruit set because it feels comfortable to do so, because it's not competing with anything, and it has plenty of new budwood every single year. The same thing goes with this Meyer lemon bush right here. If I didn't prune it, it would be taller than my house right here. But because I do prune it, it has a profuse amount of fruit on it in a very, very small form factor. Believe me when I tell you, there is more fruit on this 5-foot tall Meyer lemon bush that is pruned aggressively every single year than if it were 10 to 12 feet tall and I didn't prune it at all. I mean, look at all the lemons under there. Have you ever seen such a thing? It is just remarkable, and they are as far as the eye can see everywhere on this bush. Look at them in there, just incredible. And the third reason why you must prune your trees annually is because they will stay more vigorous, be healthier, and live longer. There is this false perception that trees in the woods live forever. And while it is true that some species of trees, like a live oak, can live for centuries, but the majority of what grows in a forest, they don't outlive humans. They may only live a matter of decades. And that is because they are constantly under assault. And what is under assault? The old, dead, and dying wood that stays on the tree because there's nobody there to prune that dead and dying wood off. And that dead and dying wood, it attracts all sorts of insects and boring beetles and other pests. It accumulates disease because it's weak, and it gets fungal and bacterial infections, and it winds up being the demise of trees in their natural habitat. With proper maintenance and care, the trees that you grow and prune annually will dramatically outlive what is typically found in a forest setting. The wood on this fig tree that you see right here is only a year old, and because it is so young and vigorous, you'll see it has a lot of bend to it. It's alive, it's vibrant, and this wood is extremely resistant to any kind of insect damage or any kind of diseases because it is young, vigorous wood. By comparison, this is wood at the base of the trunk of the tree that is about 4 to 5 years old, and it's gone through a handful of very cold winters that has caused some intermittent cold damage. And in that damaged area, you can see this dead wood. And over time, it's been attacked by pests here and there. Now, for the time being, the tree is still healthy, but eventually this may decline to the point where I actually have to cut the entire tree back all the way to the base and just full-on rejuvenation prune it and make it grow again from the bottom and just reestablish all the cordons and all of the growth all over again, because over time dead wood like that can cause a problem. This is why it's so important to check over your tree every single year and remove any of the dead wood that you possibly can. When it's at the bottom of the trunk like that, there's not a whole lot you can do, sans cutting down the whole tree and letting it start all over again. But we just had a series of 19-degree nights, and I noticed that some of the branches here have a little bit of cold damage to them. Like this one right here, I can tell just by feeling it. Yeah, it was damaged, so there's not a whole lot of life left in here. So it's really important that in about another month or two, I do a full inventory of the tree and I remove any dead or dying growth, because I want to get it off the tree before any of the beetles or borers or other insects wake up from the winter. Keep in mind, when growing any plant in containers, all of these characteristics are amplified. That's because the size of the root ball is limited to the container right here. So once the root ball fills out, it then becomes impossible for the plant to grow any larger past a certain point. So for that reason, it is critically important that you prune your container plants every single year, because once they top out, if you don't cut them back, there's nowhere else for them to go, because they can only grow to a predetermined height allowed by that root ball right here. In fact, fact, now that I have so many trees in ground, sometimes I forget about my container citrus. And as a result, I forgot to prune my key lime right here and my variegated lemon over there last winter. And as a result, I got no fruit from the spring into the summer because the plants had topped out. They were just kind of stuck in stasis with nowhere else to go. So I realized my mistake in the middle of summer, and I pruned these back at the end of summer, maybe the beginning of fall. And then they went through a period of regrowth, and they started to lightly flower a few weeks ago. But now that the cold stress is here, we had a very cold December here, the cold stress snapped them into a blooming cycle. And now my key lime is blooming profusely and setting fruit all over the place, and my variegated lemon isn't too far behind. So while not pruning your in-ground trees can result in lower vigor and poor performance, not pruning your container trees after a point can actually result in their death. And that right there is why you must prune your trees every single year. It is not only critical for the performance of flowering and fruiting trees, but it is also of critical importance for the health, vigor, and longevity of the plant itself. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and please ring that notification bell so you're notified when I release more videos like these. If you need a pruning tutorial, like I said earlier, I linked to one down in the video description that is very comprehensive and will teach you everything you need to know. If you're curious about any of the things that I use in real life in my garden, all of that is linked down below in the video description in my Amazon storefront link. So expand the video description, click on my Amazon storefront, you'll see everything I use in real life. And while you're down there, please check out my spread shop for custom merch if you want to support the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video. Oh my goodness, Dale. We just went for his walk, and as soon as he got home, he rubbed his nose and scratched his chin all over the yard, and now he is so dirty. Look at this dirty, hold still, hold still. Look at this dirty little boy. Let's see. Oh, ew, you're gross, Dale. You're gross, you dirty little mutt. You dirty mutt. Oh, look how much dirt that is. One more time. Clean off your weird beard. You're so funny. I guess that's better than nothing. So now Dale gets a treat. Okay, now you be gentle. Gentle. Don't you bite my finger. Gentle. Oh, very good. Very good. I'll give you one more for the dirty beard. Gentle. That was not gentle. Gentle. Very good. Very good, sweet Dale.